Welcome everybody to That CMS Guy. Today we've got a very special guest, Bob Smith, who's going to be talking to us all about removing consent and what that really means.
Consent, statutory laws, contract law. What's the difference?
So, hello Bob, welcome to the channel. And I'm before we continue, I'm going to share my screen. So Bob, this is the irrevocable, estoppel acquiescence, and I would like you to, because you're the one that actually wrote this, so I'd really appreciate if you could just talk us through it step by step. Over to you.
Sure. So I've been looking at this for quite a few years now, probably. It's quite amusing that you say that this is my document, because I actually got it from someone else as well. So well, I have made a couple of changes to suit my circumstance, and I'd also advise everybody else to do that as well. But we'll say that when we go through it. Yeah, I'll point out at what point, I think people might want to put a bit of their personal circumstances into it. Yeah.
So Bob, do you want do you need to have some form of control here in terms of underlining?
No, it's okay. I've got the pencil tool thing ready. So
yeah.
Let me just pick a really horrible color like red.
Yeah, red really gets people's attention.
Yeah. Violent red. Okay, cool. So this is essentially a document that you can use. I mean, you can use it for anything really. You can use it for the CMS. You can use it for parking charges, council tax. They all apply.
Yeah.
And what it is it's a contract essentially, or a response to a contract. And there's a lot of these out there. Like if you go on YouTube and have a look around for peacemakers and sovereign empowerment, there's loads of really smart people out there that are looking into this stuff in the background, and they've been doing it for a long time.
Yeah. So
you'll be able to find this elsewhere, probably a lot more eloquently spoken than me as well, with loads of what's the word I'm looking for? With loads of like statute law as well. Do you get what I mean? I'll try and put it in there, but because it's appropriate, and that's the whole point of this.
I think that there's so many people out there who don't know about this. I didn't even know about it myself until very recently. So I've just stumbled upon it, and as you and I talk off camera, we want this to be available to as many people as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do you know what? I'm no different from you, to be honest. I mean, I didn't know any of this stuff either. I was one of the people who didn't know anything about law, didn't know anything about different types of law. I didn't know about legislation, primary, secondary. Honestly, I didn't know any of that, but I'd encourage people to go out and learn about it, because if you don't, you'll be easy to manipulate.
So what is primary law and what is secondary law?
So primary legislation is things like criminal, so harassment, so because you can't go out in the street and stab somebody. Like you'll get arrested and you'll get taken to prison. That's usually, and obviously it's a lot more nuanced than that, but that's usually primary legislation. So there's two types. There's like harm and loss, which relate to common law, and that's where all this stuff's come from, really, originally, at least, anyway. So crime is kind of harm, and loss is kind of civil. That's roughly how they are. Those are the two types of law. So primary legislation would be a criminal act. Secondary legislation, it's usually, and again, I know I'm talking in binary terms, but it's not really this binary. But secondary legislation is usually legislation that gives entitlement or a benefit to a certain demographic. Do you get what I mean? For example, the Disability Act, yeah, that helps people who are disabled.
Yeah.
So, and it's good for society to help people who are disabled, or to give them more equity. Do you get what I mean? To treat them a little bit different, or to give them money to help them out, to walk and stuff like that.
Enable people with disabilities to have as much of a meaningful life as everybody else.
Well, and it was supposed to level the playing field.
Yeah.
Do you get what I mean? Which, and I'm sure most people out there would be like, do you know what? I absolutely agree. And I don't mind if my tax money makes people's lives better. I'm more than happy, to give them some disability allowance, or, get a helper to help them out or whatever. That's how society works. That's how society functions. Yeah. So that's the difference, roughly. I mean, like I said, it's a lot more nuanced than that. And this is not legal advice as well. Like, if you want it, go out and find it. You can find all the law books out there for tort law, contract law, family law, criminal law. And I know because I've got them and I've read them. And that's literally the next step. When I started seeing this stuff, I was like, hang on a minute, there's more to this. It's not as simple as there's law and you must abide by it. And that's kind of what this video is all about. It's encouraging people to go out and read instead of sitting and watching Netflix for 6 hours, or,
which I'm going to do sometimes, by the way.
I'm not saying don't do that at some point to chill out, but, at some point, so part of this, I would imagine, that part of this message needs to be that because of our current lives and our current society, that's what the people in power want us to do. They want us to just go, oh, yeah, parking ticket, right, I'll pay it. Oh, right, yeah, this has happened. I'll pay that. I'll pay it. And that's the problem. We now have been conditioned to pay without question.
It's a mass gaslighting.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you've probably heard it recently, like we're the most taxed we've ever been. And even just bearing in mind what that means, and that's come from mainstream media, which is worrying because they control it all, right? Now imagine if we dug into those figures that determine we pay the most tax we ever have now. Let's add to that things like council tax, PCNs, child support. Now imagine if the mainstream media had added all those into it. I'm surprised we're not being taxed to go and have a wee. Do you get what I mean?
It's like, whatever they can try to tax us for, or whatever they can do to extract money from us, then they will do it. And on the basis that you believe that everything that you see out in the real world, or any type of fine, is an official document.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, I've not even included driving taxes in that. The amount we pay at the pump, which is, I think it's like 60% tax and whatever else. There's also road tax. There's all sorts of stuff in there.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is the thing. When we get our wages, we're taxed at like 30, 40, 50%.
So they really just want to
everything. And then everything we buy is taxed. We're paying tax on it.
We're taxed so heavily in this.
Oh, it's crazy, mate. It's absolutely crazy. And do you know what? And I think the main point of this whole video should be, apart from being brainwashed into just being consumers to pay absolutely everything, and I think the main point needs to be, people are struggling.
Yeah.
People are struggling to pay their bills.
Yeah.
And part of this movement, like if you go and watch other stuff, it's starting to go, hang on a minute, let's question this. And that's all we're doing. We're not saying it's right, we're not saying it's wrong, we're just saying, let's question it. Well, that's all we're doing, is we're asking questions.
Everybody in the child support system who's got a case with the child support system is thinking to themselves, I can imagine that they are thinking to themselves, how do I get out of this? this doesn't seem right. Where I've got no right to defend myself or question this payment that they're expecting me to pay. I can barely survive myself. I'm paying well over the odds. Why is this being allowed to happen? So, Bob, if you could explain what corporate law is and how people are getting into this acquiescence, these unknown agreements, these agreements that they're making with CMS unknowingly, unwittingly.
Yeah. So okay. So this is the real basics of this whole. I don't know what you call it, like a movement or whatever. But the basics of it is every time you get a letter through the door and it's in all caps, that's actually your legal fiction. That's not you. So when you're born and your parents register you, they basically give the state your name and they're signing up to pay off the country's debt. I mean, that's just roughly. And there's more to it. It's a lot more complicated. And if you want to find out, go and look that up. But that's essentially the basis of this whole thing and this whole document. So what happens after that is, because they've then got you on the hook as if you were a fish, they then make you responsible for that legal fiction person.
And this is the legal fiction here that Joe Blogs in all capitals, isn't it? That's the
yeah. This is the thing, right? And I challenge people to do this. If you don't believe me, and if you don't believe the other videos, just watch it. Watch the mail that comes through your door. Yeah. If you get something, for example, an appointment from the NHS, it won't be in your all caps name because they're talking about the actual person. Because the person will physically have to go to, I don't know, your GP or the hospital. Yeah. The only time you ever get anything in caps is when you've got a financial responsibility or they want some money and the issue is it's a contract. That's essentially what they're trying to do. So they misuse your all caps.
Explain because you explained this beautifully to me the other day.
Yeah,
the legal fiction and what they've really done. This person is dead at sea. Explain that to me.
Yeah. So, and again, this is all you can find this more detailed info elsewhere. But essentially, when you're born, there's maritime law and law of the land, and when you register your birth name, and I think this is right, it might be wrong. I'm human, make mistakes. So again, Google it. But they then register your birth, but because you've not claimed your name, your all caps name, it's considered dead at sea. But then they've got you to be responsible for it. So this document is kind of you representing your legal fiction name. It's not taking responsibility for it, but that's kind of what you're doing. You're answering on behalf of it. But most people, just when they see their all caps name, they just automatically assume that it's them as a person. And they go along with the pantomime that they are the legal fiction, which they're not.
So Joe Blogs at the top there, that's written in capital letter, and then that's the real live individual.
Yeah, so that name there is a person, a physical human being person. Yeah. This person here is a legal fiction.
Yeah.
They're completely different. People don't get it, but that's the truth. And again, like I said, watch what comes through your mailbox. You will see it and you'll witness it. And this is the other thing. What I challenge people to do is, even if you don't believe this, do that one thing. Just make a note of everything that comes through your door, and take, if you like, everybody's got a smartphone. Take a photograph of every single letter that comes through, and just watch the difference of mail. What comes through is your all caps, and what doesn't, and just try and figure out the difference between them both. And what you'll end up coming to the conclusion is when it's in lowercase, it'll be about the human person. And when it's not, it'll be a bill or some tax or, DVLA or, any of these corporate companies. because what they're doing is they're playing out contracts that you've agreed to that you weren't aware of.
How do people get into an agreement with, say, the CMS unknowingly?
Well, so, I mean, it's really simple. And this is what I think people get a bit dubious about, where they'll be like, it can't be that simple. It's like common law, harm and loss. Sounds really simple, but it literally is that simple. And that's what law's been based on, our current laws. So it's the same for contracts law. I mean, and this is the other thing. You'll have already done it. Every time you meet a police officer and they ask you if you are the person you say you are, you always say yes. You're entering into a contract with that police officer. And again, I challenge people to do this. I did this and it blew my mind. I got told the government is a corporation. The CMS, all these NGOs, all these departments, they're all corporations. MPs, corporations. Police constabularies, corporations. Crime and police commissioners, corporations. I'm like, this can't be true. This can't be right. And when I went and looked, I found them all. I found all their company numbers. And I was like, oh my God, this is insane. Like, how is this? How does everybody not know this? I felt like an idiot. I was like, I've been going through this life for decades and I had no idea that this was a thing.
So what is the revelation then? Why does it matter if the CMS is a corporation or the police is a corporation? What's the significance of that?
Well, the significance is, in corporate law, in contract law, you need a signed agreement by both sides to have a valid, legally binding contract. Now, that's not entirely true, because what's happened in today's society is we've almost taken them automatically. So, for example, I mean, let's say for argument's sake, I said to you, I'm a bit broke and I need £100. Can you lend me £100? I'll pay you back in a month. And you go, oh, okay, yeah, I can lend you £100, but I want it back in a week. And we go, okay, cool, brilliant. That's a contract. Yeah. Even though there's no documents and we've not signed anything, that's a contract. I mean, it'd be difficult to prove that in court because there's no evidence unless you recorded the conversation. Or, let's say for argument's sake, I'd done it via text message. You're on a much better ground there because I can screenshot them and I've got evidence of it. So then when I don't pay you in a week or 2 weeks or whatever, and I pay you a month later, or I don't pay you, you've then got evidence to say, well, hang on, we made a verbal contract. You didn't pay it back. Here's the evidence. I can go to court and get my money back. I mean, obviously small claims court, but still. But that's the basis of a contract. I mean, it's obviously not a formal contract. It's just a normal, verbal contract. But it's still the same thing. It's still a contract.
And the CMS, they get you into a corporate contract, don't they?
Yeah, so what they do is they use, it's exactly the same as PCN's council tax, and I would imagine a whole host of other things, like the DVLA and all this. They essentially misuse, I was going to say use, but they misuse that example I've just given you to entice people into accepting a corporate contract.
So basically what happens is that, from what you're saying, the CMS say, right, you owe £380 per week, and people go, oh no, I've got to pay this. So you contact them, and that's it, you're in an agreement.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Absolutely. And by taking part in this fiction, because it is literally a pantomime fiction, what you're doing is you're actually taking part in a contract.
And you don't even know it.
You don't even know it, no. And they're not going to tell you. They're not going to go, oh, yeah, this is a corporate contract.
Well, it's a double bind. You explained it as a double bind. So if you ignore it, you're in agreement.
Yeah, so this is where consent comes in.
And then if you contact them, you're in agreement. So you're in this double bind situation in the middle with whatever you do, you're agreeing to it. So that that creates a problem all of its own. So if
Yes.
there's no way to not agree to it, how do you get out of it?
So, okay, so what you're talking about there is, it's called tacit consent. And this is what I think people aren't aware of, because they've been conditioned over decades to just automatically consent, be agreeable, and say yes. And I mean, that's most people's default state, is to be agreeable and to be a good person, right? So they just automatically go, yeah, all right, no problem. And they go along with it, and they agree to it without even realizing what they've agreed to. And because the other side doesn't say, oh, hang on a minute, you do know you've entered into a contract there. Because they don't say that, you just carry on going along with it.
And the more that you engage with the CMS, calling them, writing to them, you are just agreeing to that unwritten contract. And that's like people say, why are the CMS doing this? Because they know, which what you don't know, is that you are in a contract with them.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is how I'd call it a scam, to be honest. But this is how the scam works. And again, I'd challenge anybody to look and try and figure out. And I guarantee you'll notice, because in the past you've probably not looked because you're a good person. Every single thing you get from these people, well, this corporation, have a look at every letter you've got. At no point will you get a person's full name, ever. And the reason for that is because if you did get a person's full name, you can target that single person, and you can take that person to court themselves, just that one person. But what they do is they hide behind the corporation, the government, the business. And they say, oh, I'm not going to give you my full name. So then you can't do anything. So, and that's it's called stonewalling. And you'll see MPs do this by default. You ask them a question, they don't actually answer the question. They'll talk about all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff around the topic, but they won't say yes or no. So yeah, I mean, this is the other thing. Have you ever had a full name on any of your documents ever?
No, not from the CMS. They don't put any names at all.
What about the council and people like that?
Well, no, I don't think so. Not that I can remember.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So again, that's another point for people to look out for. Yeah, watch out for people's full names. Yeah.
And why is it, Bob, that when I've been foolish enough to call the CMS and I've asked for their full name, they don't give it. But public servants are meant to give their full name so that they can be accountable. Why don't they give it?
Because it's a company and they're going by contract. They're not going to give you their full name.
Because they don't want to be made accountable for the fraud.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've got a letter here, and it says, and it's the the HMCTS.
Oh, yeah. Her Majesty's, well, His Majesty now, His Majesty's Court and Tribunal Service.
And that is an official emblem, isn't it?
That's the official logo and headed paper. But this is another trick that they'll use, right? And again, if you've been in this situation, go back and have a look at these documents. So if you've had I use air quotes, summons, only HMCTS can order or issue a summons. And what I mean by that is the police go to the CPS and the CPS order a charge. It then goes to a court and a judge goes, right, summons. And you'll see a judge's full name on the summons. I guarantee you, every single summons you've ever had from the CMS is not a HMCTS document.
So what is it then?
Well, it might as well be me or you just printing it out.
Well, they still put the emblem of the HMCTS.
Ah, yeah, well, hang on. So the one I got, one of the pages out of, I can't remember how many it was, like 8 pages. The 2 pages at the end of the document, which were ways to pay, in air quotes, one of them was literally just copied off the HMCTS website, which said, this is guidance on how to pay. And what they're doing that for is to trick you into thinking it's an official HMCTS court summons. It's not. They've just stolen a couple of pages from the HMCTS advice to pay.
How are they able to get away with that without being sued?
Well, because they're not. You can't target anybody. You can't target anybody. It's a company, and not only that, you're taking part in the contract. You're a willing participant in the contract. So what's your defense? You haven't got any. And this is the other thing, right? And this is what people don't get. You've consented, whether you know you have or not. Ignorance is not a defense in this case. You can't go, oh, well, I didn't know. So it's like, well, you're taking part in it, you know.
And so, Bob, is that the reason why you've got the Child Support Act 1991, Section 33, Paragraph 4, which says that the magistrates are not allowed to look at evidence that the CMS provide? It's to do with this contract that people are unwittingly in.
Yeah, so that's part, yeah. I mean, that's a good point you make there, actually, because if it was, this is the other thing, if it wasn't a private company contract, the magistrates should be able to look at it, right? Is that not how the courts work? Is that not how the judiciary works? And what they're actually trying to do is they're trying to bypass the 3 stages of how our democracy works. This is how democracy works. We are the people. We entrust our powers to our king. He then entrusts them, because he can't do it on his own. He then entrusts it to MPs, politicians. Politicians are then supposed to carry out our will and make law, statute law, whatever you want to call it. But what that law is supposed to do is they're supposed to make law. The judiciary are then supposed to, well, the judiciary and the police are supposed to carry out that law. And again, the CPS will give them guidance and all that sort of stuff. But that's how it works. And then how it's supposed to work is, if anything gets breached, like you break the law of in any way, shape or form, the police are supposed to then take you to court. You're then supposed to say, well, okay, I want a jury trial, a trial by my peers, which is supposed to be, air quote, a fair trial. And then 12 of our people, other people, hear your case and decide. In the old days, this is how it used to work. Nowadays, you can't change statute law. You can't do it. MPs can do it, but they never do it. I mean, well, they do it a little bit. But let's take the CMS, for example. They'll never change that law. But this is the thing. Did the people ask for that law? No. But it's in place. So this is the other thing. How do you say no to that law?
And that leads us perfectly on to this letter, doesn't it? This document, sorry.
Yeah.
So, Bob, if you could go line by line and just explain to us what is going on in this document, so that everybody can understand what they're doing if they use this document.
Yeah. So this document is essentially saying, because the CMS claim, just like PCNs, just like council tax, they claim that it's a debt. Now, if you look up the legal definition of a debt, there's a couple of things that they need to prove. And one of those things is somebody's, again, we're back to harm and loss. Somebody's suffered some loss. Financial, whatever, emotional, whatever, okay? Some loss in some way. And they have to show evidence of that loss. Like,
that's law, isn't it? That's
black and white. Yeah. I mean, again, I'd encourage people, go out and have a look. Have a look at the legal definition of debt. And I mean, this is the other thing, like, PCNs also bypass this democracy. They go, oh, you parked here, pay us. And they just bypass it completely. Doesn't go to court. If it does go to court, you'll be heard by privately hired magistrates in a privately hired courtroom for the the duration, and then and that's how they're doing it. They're trying to bypass the legal system. They're trying to bypass the judiciary, which is not. I mean, that's not right. That's not what this country should be doing. We should all be able to say, "I want a trial by a jury." Anyway, so what this is it's called a conditional acceptance letter. So what you're doing is you're not saying no to anything. And that's kind of what the CMS legislation does. If you're an idiot and you go, "No, I'm not doing that," and start effing and jeffing and whatever, they'll spank you for it, because you're breaching the contract. And again, you can have a look at the CMS legislation. There's legislation in there to say, if you say no, we're going to spank you. We're going to lock you up. We're going to take away your house, your car, your passport, whatever. And again, these, you'll have noticed over time, these have become increasingly draconian measures over time. So what you're doing with this letter is, you're saying, first of all, it's private and it's not negotiable. These are your terms, okay? So what happens with the CMS is they'll send you anything. They'll ring you up or they'll send you a letter or whatever. That's an offer to contract. They're not going to tell you that, but that's what it is. They're going to say, they're going to say whatever the hell they want to try and get you into a contract. What you're saying here is, we've acknowledged your offer to contract, and we're not disagreeing with you, but there's certain conditions. So this letter is to attach conditions to their offer of a contract, okay? And what you're doing here is you're saying, I'm a normal human being. I'm representing this artificial person, which is the all caps name. You need to put in this part any reference numbers they've got, or and you need to make sure it's your department that deals with your case. Can't remember how many there is. I think there's like a couple. I think there's only a couple of them. Date it. Again, it's irrevocable, and they can't stop it by acquiescing, which means ignoring it. So then let's move down a bit, mate. Let's go down a bit. So, so what you're essentially saying here is you're acknowledging the statute law, and what you're doing is you're saying, I'm going to remove my consent. In other words, if you go along with it, if you interact with them, you're taking part in that contract. So what this part means is, I'm not doing that by default. In other words, remove that default position. Yeah, so whatever you say, you need my explicit consent, not tacit consent.
Because that's how they've got absolutely everyone, isn't it? That tacit.
Because people hear the word law and they hear the word court, and people get scared because they associate court and law with criminality, and that's what they're preying on. That's what they're using.
People's ignorance against them.
Yeah, well, people's fear and people's ignorance. So then what you're saying is, any previous contract and consent between that company and my dead company, or my artificial legal fiction, is now over. You're removing that contract. But then you're also saying in this next part, I'm more than happy to pay it, but we've read some recent legislation in some media, and what I'm referring to there is, there's a lot of stuff that's coming out online that's starting to unravel a huge corporate fraud, and that's all I'm going to say about that. But have a look.
Basically saying we are on to you. We know what this is really about.
Well, we're just acknowledging it. We're just saying, look, we get it. We get. It's corporate law, contract law. That's all we're saying. And we're just saying we get how consent works, and we're removing it. We're removing the default. I mean, this is the other thing. You've got to ask yourself. When I found that out, I was like, hang on a minute.
Is it that simple? Is it really that simple?
Well, this is the other thing you've got to ask yourself. Why is it that they've gone for the default, which is that by default, everybody consents? Why is that the default? Why is it not the opposite?
Because it makes profit.
Well, first of all, it's easier. They don't have to do anything to get our consent. And second, yeah, it allows them to use that en masse in huge numbers to generate revenue. But yeah, so I mean, this is a critical part that I've underlined as well. So what you're not doing here is you're not saying, you know what, I ain't going to pay this nonsense. You're saying I'll happily pay it under these conditions.
Because just stop there for a second. Because the moment that you say I'm not paying it, you've broken the law, haven't you?
The moment you say you're not paying it, you've broken the CMS section, whatever it is. And then, this is the real bind, they can go to court and legally say, right, look, they've broken the contract, he's saying no to it, therefore we want justice. And that's when they'll use the statute law against you to do whatever. And I'm sure, right, this is the other scary thing, I'm sure there's people out there that have committed suicide or lost the house or gone homeless or bankrupt or all of the above because of this scam. Because of this. And because they've let their anger get the better of them. And they'll have gone, F you or, whatever. I'm not doing that. I'm not paying. So, but we're not doing that.
Because
we're not saying that.
Reality is that, for all those people that have suffered an extraordinary loss, such as suicide, loss of property, a loss of driving license. It is unjust. It is.
Well, okay. So I'm glad you've said that, because that is what I think another big point of this video needs to be, which is if a secondary piece of legislation invokes primary, so criminality, I think it's every single person's duty out there not to say no, but to question it. And that's what this is.
Yeah.
It's to say, hang on a minute. And this is what I would say in this part here. Let me just get rid of so in this part here, I mean, I know it's really short, this is just like a template sort of version, but in this part here, if you've had any ill consequences, any at all, I don't know, your ex has stopped you seeing your kids, or you've been bankrupt, or you've lost a house, or you've lost a bloody relative or whatever, suicide. If any of that stuff's happened, put it in there.
Yeah, I did. I put the fact that I'd lost work because of it, because my health had suffered.
Yeah, there you go.
My mental health.
Yeah.
Anything connected to the fact that how the CMS have interacted with you and caused you harm, put it in there.
That's what they're doing there, mate. That's harassment. So that's harassment. Put that in there. That's a crime. That's criminal. That's primary legislation. That's harassment. Get it put in there. Well, I think it's primary anyway. The point is, it's a crime. Yeah, it's greater than this piece of legislation, which is secondary, which just benefits what? It's supposed to benefit children. We all know it doesn't. It gets spent. Women are working nowadays. It gets spent in corporations. And that's the whole point of this legislation, just to tax us further, to fill more corporations' pockets, profits. That's what it's for.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd encourage people to put their individual experiences in that first part.
So basically, so moving on. So what you're saying is that you would love to continue paying as per
Absolutely
our defunct contract, but for anybody to do that, consenting to a contract, the CMS need to provide the following. And what do they need to provide?
Yeah, so I think the best way of doing it is in this part. If you want to put your personal circumstances in there, so say, look, this air quote service has caused harm. Therefore, I'm going to put these conditions on it. In other words, I'm not saying no to this legislation because I think in certain circumstances it probably does have benefit. However, they call it debt. Now, do you think anybody who's ever had a case with the CMS has ever had to pay out any money because of the CMS legislation? Let me ask you a different way. Does the government pay mostly, I think it's 90% mums and 10% dads? Do you think the government's paying them this CMS money first and then recovering it from other parents?
No.
Right. That's how debt works. So it's not a debt.
Oh yeah, because that's that. Yeah. So let's explain this. So if you've suffered a loss, your insurance company would make a payout, right?
Well, the way the legal way debt works is, if, for example, let's say for argument's sake, a customer buys a service or whatever from a company and then doesn't pay for that service, the service might go, well, actually, we've lost out on time. And they might go, right, well, and we can prove that, and there you go. There's the amount of staff, there's the amount of time, blah, blah, blah. But this is the other thing, right? Services, like, this is the thing. Would you hire a service to, I don't know, come and paint your roof?
Maybe.
Well, if it doesn't need doing, no. Right. So that's the problem with this air quote service. It's like, okay, if it's a service, I can choose to accept it or not. I don't want this service. And this is the other thing. If it's done harm and you've put that harm in there, why should you accept this service? It's like paid someone to harm you. Would you do that?
It's crazy, isn't it?
It's absolutely insane, mate.
Actually, you were saying something to me the other day, saying, well, most people who are in the CMS, they've split up with their partner, right? Often abusive partner.
Yes.
Generally, it's not saying it's always the female, but it's the female that tends to go to the CMS and say, well, I want to enter into a contract with you. And what the CMS is really doing is continuing the abuse between these two people.
Yeah. So let's say, for argument's sake, in fact, you know what? Let's reverse it. Let's use one of the 10% of mothers who get harassed by the CMS, right? So let's say, for argument's sake, there's a couple, they've got a couple of kids together. He cheats on her. It could be the other way, but he cheats on her. She goes, right, relationship over. He then takes the kids and goes and lives in his house. He rings up the CMS, and then guess what? There's a contract between him and the CMS. The CMS then try and entice you into a contract with a service that you don't require on the basis of resurrecting an old relationship that you've abandoned. And they try and resurrect it. Well, hang on.
I'll give them back in my previous marriage. Right? After the side, I didn't.
This is the thing, right? It shouldn't really matter. The individual circumstances shouldn't matter because the rules still apply. But effectively, what they'd be doing there is they'd be trying to resurrect an old relationship just in a financial capacity that neither party wants anymore. Like, I'm not being funny, but how is that even possible? Do you get what I mean? Like, how is that even possible? I mean, bearing in mind the equality laws and the human rights laws we've got right now, how is the government managing to resurrect a relationship nobody wants?
How is it that an agency is able to flaunt a whole raft of laws? What about slavery laws? What about equality laws? What about your human rights in order to advantage one parent over another?
Yeah. Well, think about it this way. If we play that case through, yeah, she'll get harassed. He's cheated on her. She'll get harassed. She'll get 30% net of whatever salary she's getting. It doesn't take into account her costs. She's then got to pay her abuser. What?
Crazy. Absolutely.
Does that sound right? And listen to this. If she doesn't comply, they then steal it from her bank account.
And then give it to the abuser.
Exactly. Does that sound right to you?
It doesn't, does it? It's absolutely...
No, I mean, I'm not being funny, mate, right? But that doesn't sound right to me.
And then, yeah,
I've heard some crazy
people are
things.
saying men must pay, but actually the reality is that if it was the other way around, 90% women and 10% men, wow, that would be institutional abuse.
Yeah. I mean, this is the other thing, right? Even if nothing's happened and they've gone, do you know what? It's not working. Let's just get divorced, go our separate ways. Even if that's the case, you can't avoid the harassment. Or, well, let me be more accurate. One of the parties can't avoid more harassment. So that then exacerbates the battle for the kids, which then fuels the profits for family court. Who's getting the kids?
It's almost like it's satanic.
It's almost like it's been set up intentionally to extract wealth. Oh, hang on.
And also,
Hang on a minute.
Satanic. It's almost satanic.
Well, it goes against absolutely everything. It goes. I mean, if you're going to categorize it as good and evil, I can't think of anything more evil than this piece of legislation. It doesn't matter whether you've done good or not, or whatever. They're trying to force people back into relationships that are dead, and pay money, and the power they've got is insane. Anyway, let's get back to the...
Hey, let's go back to this irrevocable, estoppel by acquiescence.
Yeah, so like I said before, put all your consequences in there, your circumstances. Any harm, stick it in there. This part here is, we see your offer of contract, and on behalf of this legal fiction, we're going to put some conditions to it and offer a modified contract. So the first part is, can you validate the debt? In other words, show me a loss, because that's how debt works legally. And like we already discussed, do you think they'll be able to do that?
Absolutely not. And if they do...
No, because nobody's paid any money. No one's lost anything. So then we're going to go, verify your claim against me. In other words, a signed invoice. Because that's what happens, right? If you get something from, I don't know, a lumber yard or whatever, you'll deal with someone, you'll get an invoice. You pay the invoice. And then it's also saying that's how contract law works. That's literally how contract law works. So we're asking for a valid contract. In other words, we're not disagreeing to pay, but these are the conditions under which we will pay. Yeah? So validate a debt, because it's not a debt, and then verify in accordance with the contract of third party 1999, show us it. And then this further continues and says, show me a contract signed by both parties. And it says, it just reminds them we've removed our consent. And then it asks for a certified copy of that contract and warns them there'll be, there's the consequences because you're adhering to law.
A load of people will be asking, is this a legal document then? How is this enforceable? Can you talk us through that one then?
Well, because what you're doing is you're acting on behalf of your legal fiction. I mean, you're not that legal fiction.
No.
But you're acting on its behalf. You're saying, look, we get it. We get how this works. And actually, the human person doesn't agree with the terms of this contract. So what we're going to do is we're going to call you out on your contract. We're going to ask you to do... This is your own terms and conditions. That's what this is. When you go on a website, tick to accept these terms and conditions, that's what this bit is. We're saying, we'll pay it, we'll gladly pay it, but you need to adhere to these terms and conditions. And you know what? These terms and conditions are global for contract law. That's all we're saying. What we're doing here, this is just contract law conditions. These are the default conditions of contracts. Like, go and have a look at any contract you got. Your employment contracts, I mean, we'll get onto that as well in a second. But your employment contract, it adheres to all this stuff. Yeah, all these air quote laws. Right, let's scroll down a bit, mate. Yeah, so then this part is, I mean, this is really simple. So this says, if you don't provide us with those conditions, yeah, evidence of those conditions, and this is just a repeat of that. So it's like, if you don't provide that, we're going to assume this is true. Yeah? Which is, the debt didn't exist in the first place, or it's been paid in full. Any damages that you suffer, they'll be held culpable. Yeah? And then, there you go. So that's another one. So this is how they get you as well. They'll go to some credit agency and say, oh, he's not paid this or that or whatever. And you'll see that a lot. Again, it's all part of the manipulation. They'll extort money out of people and they'll threaten them with a bad credit score and all that. Credit scores is arbitrary, completely nonsense. Because who makes the credit score? All these companies that want your money. Yeah, and it's got, don't pursue it any further. And down here we've got, if you do, it's harassment. So that's a warning. And then they also agree to pay the fees, which are further down, and then remove all my data. They won't do that because they love people's data. And that's a big, another message for this video is, what they're actually doing is they're misusing their your data against you. So anybody who's on PAYE, they're using that data against you. Like, what right have they got to go and fiddle with your PAYE? What right have they got to message your employer and fiddle with your contract of employment? Like, this is the thing. Your contract of employment is a contract between you and your employer. It's nothing to do with the government. They've got absolutely no right to see or interfere with that contract. But guess what? They do. Through fear. And they'll be emailing your employer. Oh, DEO. This guy's not paid his debt. So this is another thing. I'd encourage employers to do this letter. If they get a DEO in, send them this letter and say, okay, we see what you're saying here. Can you show me? Can you prove the debt? You claim he owes all this money. Oh, and this is another trick, which is it's statutory. Like what? Nothing's statutory.
Explain that, because that word statutory in the ears of many hundreds of people would be like, well, you have to pay it. This is considered to be a statutory or mandatory debt.
So private family lives, which are part of the human rights, yeah, the EHCR and our own Human Rights Act, your private family life is nothing to do with the government. This piece of legislation is completely contrary to that. Because how can you have a private family life if the government are getting involved in that? Does that sound private to you?
Absolutely not.
Well, the government are a public body, right? Apparently. Yeah, well, it's not private. So this whole piece of legislation is completely contrary to having a private family life.
So is this legislation, is it higher than like the right to family life? Is it higher or lower? Where does it sit in the hierarchy there?
That's a good question. I'm not sure, but I would imagine criminal legislation, so harassment, fraud, theft from people's wages, I would imagine a combination of all those and the Human Rights Act probably trump this piece of secondary legislation. Do you get what I mean?
So how are people not being able to go, this is against my human rights, I'm out of here?
Fear and knowledge. That's it. They fear the government. They fear it. That We've been conditioned over decades to just comply. We saw it during COVID. This is
Well, stay at home. Okay, boss.
Yeah, absolutely. This is no different, mate. This is the same thing over and over again. And again, if anyone wants to sort of dig a bit deeper into that, just go on YouTube and have a look at the Milgram experiment.
What experiment?
The Milgram experiment.
What's that then?
Compliance, obedience.
Right.
And we've had more since then, but that's literally what they're doing. They're using fear to get what they want. That's all this stuff is, all of it. Okay, so, so this part here, again, there's another personal part here. So I've got children at home. So I've also put that in there. And I put, look, there's a child here who's also got human rights. Another thing as well is, if you're disabled or you've got any sort of disability or, neurological, any of that sort of stuff, put it in there. Because again, this is more legislation to back up your argument, which is, whatever Disability Act or vulnerable children or, all that sort of stuff. So if you take it in terms of weighting legislation, at the moment we've got the CMS stuff on one side and loads of criminal stuff and harassment and disability stuff and equality stuff on the other. So it's outweighed, completely outweighed. But I'd encourage people, if you've got anything at all, put it in there. Because it will have an impact on your personal circumstances.
How many fathers out there have got mental health issues? How many have suffered financial loss?
Yeah.
How many have been isolated? How many are on medication? How many are have got physiological issues as well because of the?
Well, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that because this is the physiological consequences, right? If people have got debt, and again, you can look this up. Like, have a look on Google Scholar. If people have got debt and they're being forced even further into debt, that causes a biological response. It causes cortisol. That literally will kill you.
And that's the reason why I think I became a diabetic. I'm type 1 diabetes. At the age of 37, I became a diabetic. Now, I was always fit and healthy, thin, fit, exercise 3 to 4 days a week, ate healthy. But because of this ongoing pressure of this family call and CMS.
So that's an interesting point. I'm glad you brought that up because this is another thing, and I've not even thought this before now. But if you go to the CPS website and have a look at the definition of controlling and coercive behaviour, it's something that affects you every day, right? That's what this is doing.
Actually, if you listen to them in court, if you listen to them in Parliament talking about CMS legislation, they said they want to go for more coercive legislation.
Yeah, more draconian.
Openly saying that.
Yeah. Honestly, mate, right, check this out. This scandal, because it will be eventually a scandal.
Oh, no, it's bigger than the post office. And as the men's rights body said, this makes the post office scandal look like shoplifting. I love that.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is absolutely massive. Absolutely huge, honestly. People have died. People have lost their houses. I'd love, and obviously it's wishful thinking, but I'd love for people to get together and turn around and do a class action against the government for harm and loss.
That's a lot of money. Now, Sally Ann Barris has been trying to do that, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so I think this just sort of finishes it off. Uses Data Protection Act. They probably won't because, they should because they're technically not a financial institution, but it essentially says, can you just remove all my details?
And we have a right to demand it, not ask for it, demand it.
Yeah. You'll usually get fobbed off by a lot of people or companies anyway. well, I say people won't fob you off, but all the companies will. Most of the time, they'll default to, oh, we have to adhere to some piece of legislation and we have to store it for God knows how. The reason why they're storing your data is exactly the same reason why all the big tech firms are rich. They're misusing your data.
Selling it off to third parties.
Well, they're keeping hold of it. They're using it against you. I mean, this is literally what they do. This is the thing as well, right? When you interact with them, not only is it a contract and you're taking part in the contract, they fleece you for information, they update their systems, and then use that information against you. Does that sound like normal human behaviour?
No, it's satanic, I would say.
It sounds like a toxic relationship you want to ditch, right?
Exactly.
Anyway, so this fee schedule is what we've referred to earlier.
This is really interesting, this part. So what's this about then?
So this fee schedule it was mentioned earlier. So if you scroll back up a little bit. So what this part is it says, so there's basically 3 sections to this. The first part says, this is my situation, this is what's happened. I'll happily pay on these conditions. And you've given the conditions. In other words, you validate the debt, you validate a contract, etc., etc. And then it says, if you don't do all this, clause 6 is that they actually pay the fee schedule. Yeah? And you can set whatever you like, because it's your... So what you're doing is, essentially... lost it a bit there. What you're doing essentially is, you're saying, okay, we get you're offering a contract. We're not going to completely say no to your contract because we know damn well your legislation will then send us to prison or whatever. So we're saying, well, you know what? Prove it. Because the burden of proof lays with the person making the accusation. So they're accusing us of having a debt. Well, actually, prove it then. Prove there's a debt. Show me. And if you don't show me, leave me alone. Otherwise, it's harassment. That's kind of what all this bit here says and all this bit here says, which is why I said put your personal stuff in this part.
And is that valid in a magistrate's to say that?
Well, you say magistrates, but if you go to court for the CMS stuff, right, first of all, the summons is fake. So it's not a HMCTS summons. I might as well print one out and send it to you right now.
Well, if you don't turn up, you're agreeing to the contract.
Well, no, yeah, absolutely. And that's the reason. And again, I challenge people to do this. Have a look at your CMS documents. Not only will you not find a person's name in there, what you'll see and what you'll read is, don't go to court. And they'll say, you don't need to. Which, for me, is a massive red flag. Which means, actually, you do need to go to court. Because what they're trying to do is, they're trying to skip over the judiciary part of the 3 stages of democracy. Yeah? They're trying to skip that part and just hit you with corporate law. They're trying to pull the wool over your eyes.
When you go to court, you want to say, I'm here to represent the legal fiction.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is, again, back to the police scenario. They'll say, are you blah, blah, blah? And you'll go, yes.
Well, you'd say, no, I'm here, I'm Paul Whittles.
Well, you can say whatever you want. You can say no if you want. But, again, you'll just consent by acquiescence. You'll just, you know what I mean? So I'd say, yes, I'm here on behalf of my legal fiction. And then I'd just stand up in court and I'd read out this letter. I'd say, well, I'd actually attach a bit more and I'd say, first of all, this summons that I'm holding in my hands, who's issued this, please? Because I'm pretty sure only the judiciary can issue a court summons. And this doesn't look like a HMCTS document. That's the first thing I'd be asking in court. And then the second thing would be exactly what I've got in this document. Where's the debt? Show me a valid debt. Dude, this is not debt. This is extracting wealth based on, well, in the hacker terms, this is what's called a man-in-the-middle attack, right? So you've got a parent who's got the kids and a parent who hasn't got the kids. And the man in the middle is the CMS. They're playing both sides off against each other. Nothing good about this. They've set up a contract between they've promised the parent some money, and then they're trying to fleece the other parent for that money. This is the thing: you can't force somebody into a contract. It's not possible. You can't do it.
Well, legally, but no. How's that? You're saying that, but the CMS are doing it to hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah, because they're preying on people's lack of knowledge.
So the only reason that you're in a contract with them is because you don't know what corporate law is.
No, the only reason why you're in a contract with them is because you're taking part in the contract.
Without knowing it.
Yeah, because you're agreeing to it. You're consenting to it without knowing you're in a contract.
When you get a letter from the CMS and it says that, you've got a case open because you've got a child and you need to pay £300 a week.
Oh, their business.
And then you call them and say, my name's ... My child lives with the other parent. I've got to pay £300 a week. And they go, yes.
You're taking part.
How would you like to pay it? Oh, I'll pay it by credit card. That's it. You're in a contract.
Yeah, you're taking part in the contract.
Somebody's gone up to you and said, you owe this sort of money. And you go, okay.
There's no different. Apart from one's claiming to be genuine and the other one is obviously being aggressive. Mind you, as far as corporates go, this is about as aggressive as I've ever seen.
So this pay schedule, talk us through it.
Yeah, so this fee schedule. So you're saying, look, if you can't prove all this stuff above, you can't validate the debt, if you can't, show us a contract and all that sort of stuff, any contact will be classed as harassment from now on. And by the way, remove my details. That's kind of what this bit says. But then underneath, you're saying, okay, and in, I think it was point 6, you're saying, if you contact me any further, I will be charging you under the power of my legal fiction. I'll be charging you these charges. So if they ring you up, or if they send you a letter, and it doesn't fulfill the conditions of this offer of contract, yeah? So what you're doing is you're saying, look, I'll accept your contract, I'm happy to pay, but under these conditions. If they ignore the conditions, which they probably will, for 2 reasons. First of all, they can't fulfill them, because there is no debt. It's not even a debt. It doesn't even work that way. And second, if they did do that, they'd be admitting to fraud by issuing a fake summons, etc., etc. And what you're saying is, every time you try and interact with me, I've not consented to your contract, and B, it says here, they'll be making an unverified claim by not fulfilling the conditions of this contract you're sending. Any letter or email or whatever incurs that money, and then you can charge them per hour on top of that. And then it says there, every time they try and deny you undue due process, which is literally what these summonses are, if they've not come from the judiciary, via the police and the CPS, they're not genuine. That's not due process. You can send them, you could put £1 in there if you want, it really doesn't matter. But if I got a response from them, I would literally be sending them another follow-up letter to say, you've not fulfilled these conditions of this contract. In other words, I'm not in your contract, I've not accepted it. And until you do, I'm going to charge you. And I'd send them an invoice attached as well. And I'd also remind them of the fee schedule they've attached. I'd say, look, if you continue, it'll just keep growing. And that's exactly what all these companies do. I don't know if you've ever had anything from, anybody really, like an insurer or even these private parking firms. You do this. They'll say, oh, you parked here and you shouldn't have done, or you've gone over your time, a lot of time or whatever. and they'll send you a fine and they'll go, if you don't pay it in 30 days, we'll add these charges. If you don't pay it in blah blah blah, they'll add these charges. And this is what Marston's do as well. Marston's will do this. You'll get a PCN, 30 quid or 60 quid or whatever. They'll go, right, you pay it, or we'll chuck it to someone else. And they chuck it to Marston's. Marston's bang, I don't know, 200 quid, 300 quid on top. It's like, what? Like, I've not agreed to any of these contracts. What are you on about? Do you know what I mean? But that's how it works. They're just trying to get one over on you. And again, it's all fear. Because all you want to do is pay your anxiety away. That's literally what you're doing. Instead of dealing with it head on, you're just paying to not be anxious. And that's it. That is literally it. You just sign it with a signature, proper signature. And then anything you've referenced in here. So anything you reference in the body up here, any primary legislation like theft, extortion, harassment, any of that sort of stuff, put it in. You can put it in here. And I think this was used on whoever that is, CCL Collections harassment alert. So someone's obviously been getting harassed by one of these debt collection places, and they've used this to chuck it back and say, prove the debt, show me it, evidence it. But yeah, the contract of rights of third party. I mean, you could just put an email, you could just put the URL in here underneath, because this is all on legislation.org.uk, right? And so is the protection from harassment stuff. That's all on legislation.org.uk. I mean, this is another thing, right? And this is what I don't think people realise, because they just take the internet for granted nowadays. Everything is out there. You just need to go and look. You need to put some effort in to go and look. Legislation.org.uk, right, is the biggest mine of information. It's insane. And that's it, really. That's it. I mean, if you've made reference in the body, in the personal parts above, to any disability or anything like that, just put it in there and just put, look, if you want a copy of this letter, it's 50 quid a copy. So, I'm going to use them as a reference in here. For example, let's say for argument's sake, that was like, a certificate of your disability. You could just put it in here and just say, look, I've referenced it, but I'm not going to print it out because that would cost me money. But I'm more than happy to pay, if you pay 50 quid, I'll give you a copy of that. Again, it's your rules, mate, yeah? It's your rules. You make the rules on behalf of your legal fiction. That's all you're doing here, is you're taking charge of your legal fiction and you're setting out the rules of contract. That's it. And this is the other thing, right? I'm sure you'll get loads of people, and they'll probably watch this and be like, oh, it's all nonsense. And I've had this loads. I've had like people like, oh, yeah, it's one of these common law weirdos. And, people love to slag people off online. You'll probably get loads of that. You'll probably get like, oh, it's nonsense, and oh, you need to pay it, and blah, blah. And do you know what? There's a lot of these support groups as well that I've noticed for the CMS stuff. And a hell of a lot of people in them are so brainwashed, they think they're helping by giving people advice on how to pay this stuff. It's like, what? Do you know what I mean? It's almost like that's how far down the rabbit hole, the brainwashed rabbit hole they've gone. Is that they just take it as if like, oh, we must do this. I mean, I remember reading one once, and I can't remember the name of the guy, thank God. But I literally sat there and I had to read it twice because he'd said something like, he'd been stopped from seeing his daughter his entire life. His kids were turned against him. He'd paid his ex child support. At one point, he ended up homeless and eventually ended up stopping paying it because they come of age. He said, but then obviously I got my job back and I got a house and stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, how is this guy? And do you know what? He was saying things like, I'm so proud that I've supported my kids and blah, blah. And I'm just thinking, that's insane. That's how bad the brainwashing gets. Like, he could have, do you know what? He actually said as part of his chat, I mean, it's a massive message. But he said at some point, he said, like, I felt like killing myself so many times throughout. And I'm like, dude, I don't know how you're alive. But that goes against our very essence of nobody in this world can tell us if we're allowed to be alive or not. So if you get to that point...
It also turns, the CMS are turning men's desire to provide as a weapon against them to extract wealth from them.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you know what? That's exactly what the system is. And this is I've said this to so many people. If I had to set up a system to extract wealth from the populace, I couldn't think of a better one than the current one we've got. Because think about this. Couple breaks up. Who's got the most money out of those two people?
Generally the woman. Oh, sorry, the man.
Well, okay, so if they get divorced, the woman will have some money. Well, let's do both examples quickly. So the woman and the man will have some money. She'll get half his stuff. She'll have the kids, maybe the house, or maybe not. But the point I'm making is both those people will have some money. Both of them will still be working. But the system works in that way. She won't get legal aid because she's got money. But guess what she'll use to go and fight for, air quote, fight for the kids?
False allegation.
Yep. Well, she used the money she's got.
Oh, yeah.
So she runs out and then she goes, oh, legal aid. And guess what he does? He spends all his money to see his own kids. Does that sound normal to you?
Brian Hudson's research proved irrevocably that when a woman divorces from her husband and is on her own, not in every case, but in a vast majority of cases,
yep,
benefits she gets, income, yes, whatever benefits that she's entitled to, tax credits, and then CMS, and invariably becomes richer than the guy that she separated
100%. And check this out. Women make 80% of the purchasing decision, so guess what she's going to spend that money?
On junk and tat that no one cares about.
The companies out there.
Yeah, lipstick and...
It doesn't matter, whatever. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's a lot of people, a lot of parents that will use it to do stuff.
Women
spend it on their kids and stuff.
Women become very good consumers, which is what they want.
Women are the perfect consumers. And again, I'd encourage people to look this up. Look it up. Look up the academia. Women are far more agreeable. They're far more persuadable. And they love to spend money. Look it up.
The natural desire is to accumulate resources.
Yeah, but to spend on themselves.
Well, that's just selfishness, isn't it?
Well, that's just women's nature. And again, not all women. I'm sure there'll be some great mums out there.
Well, there are. I mean, we need to say
But this is the other thing. The great mums out there.
This is a proportion of women who are extremely selfish.
Yeah, and that needs saying. The proportion of women out there that don't go to the CMS, they're the good mums right there.
Now, let me tell you a story. So I've got my wife's a social worker, and she works with a social worker, and she's probably could be making £500-600 a month from her ex, but she goes, do you know what her viewpoint is? She says, I won't do that because I know that the CMS is really abusive.
Yeah, because she knows the difference between harm and health.
So there are women out there, and we
good and evil, mate. It's literally good and evil.
There are women out there, and I praise you, and we praise you for it, for not going to the CMS.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is the other thing, right? If we were in like the 1920s, or before women became equal in the workplace, if that was the current time period, the current generation, I'd be like, you know what? We do need child support. Because this is the other thing. I have looked back in history, and there was a big stigma for women. I'm not anti-women. I'm pro-women. Like, you won't believe it. But there was a stigma about having a kid out of wedlock and all that stuff. And I get that.
Yeah, there was a lot of things that women had to be really careful about. They needed to be with a man. They couldn't sign for anything. It was very difficult to get a job unless there was permission from the man. There was all kinds of stuff that weren't very female or woman friendly, which is completely removed now.
Yeah, but there's a reason for it. Yeah, but hang on, because there's a reason for it. And the reason why was because, well, biological reasons, for example, like women couldn't work because, and this is the myth that they sell you, like, oh, we were oppressed and blah, blah, blah. No, you weren't. You just didn't have modern technology to remove your periods and stuff like that. Like, and they don't take any.
It was the period that really revolutionized women's freedom or liberation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Being very, very careful about what partner they chose. Now, because of the pill, they can just literally sleep around. But is that really an advancement? If you are morally if you are morally bereft and feel that you can just sleep around, get rid of a child, kill it like it doesn't really matter, and live your life as though you are morally not obliged to consider anything or any ramification in life, is that little pill really worth your soul?
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, it's a Faustian bargain, right? And we're getting into sort of religion.
Because I'm a Christian, so I have a very Christian outlook.
Me too. Yeah. No, and I agree, but, again, it is the old good and evil argument. I think I said it just a bit back, but without going into that, historically, women have never been financially responsible for their children. Like, if you look it up, honestly, from like the 1900s, for example, if a woman had a child out of wedlock, not only would she be shamed, she'd be sort of like almost outcast, but the church would have to pay for it. The area, the society, the community would literally pay for that child. And even back in the old days, right, this is what used to happen. Instead of the CMS, they'd go, she'd name a guy, and he would have to literally work off the debt that the community had paid the woman to raise that child. Honestly, look it up. It's absolutely crazy. When I found it, I was like, oh my God. Even now, when it's equal, and women work and men work, women still aren't 100% financially responsible for their kids. No. I mean, not all of them, and the ones that are, I applaud. But that's what we need to get to. We need to kill this legislation and just say, look, you know what? You're a family. Whether you're together or not, you're a family, and both partners have a responsibility to pay for those children on their watch.
It sticks in my craw when you hear all these women say that they are strong and independent, but they're and by
they're taking money from the state, and they're taking money from exes, and
because women's natural desire is just to collect resources. Now, I can understand the reasoning for that, because obviously if you want to bring up children, you need resources, but it's almost kleptomania. It's almost like an out of control device now. It's like now men are only your only value is in what resources that you have. That's tantamount to slavery, mate.
I mean, we're getting into Warren Farrell territory here, and he's absolutely right. Men are viewed as resource and what they can bring, and women are viewed as, sex objects, I guess you'd say. But I think the biggest problem is people need to really start thinking beyond themselves. So, for example, what's happening, I think, with this legislation and historically as well is, and I think you nailed it earlier, you said, we're using men's natural instinct to provide and protect against them, even after a relationship's ended. We're not saying, is 50-50.
Which is what they do in the Netherlands.
Well, bearing in mind, is the family court's, air quote, in the best interests of the child. That's what's in the best interest of the child. That they get to see both parents equally, ideally.
Absolutely.
But the current system is promoting hedonism, false allegations, legal aid, family court, and while you're in family court, you're getting absolutely financially raped by the CMS because you haven't got your kids. Like that, I honestly think that it's intentional, not only to to extract wealth, but I think it's trying to kill men off, genuinely.
No, I think that too. I mean, if you look at the Istanbul Convention, there is a global move to only look at women and girls' issues at the expense of men and boys' issues. They want to kill off men. They want to kill off men. On that note, if anybody is interested in this document out there, if you have a CMS case, you come across my channel, that CMS guy, and you see this video with me and Bob Smith, which is not his real name, and you are interested in having this document yourself and sending it off to the CMS, you can have this document for free. All you need to do is to email me at thatcmsguy@gmail.com, and I will immediately ping you over a copy of this document.
Yeah. I mean, what also needs to be said is it's not just specifically CMS. You can use this for anything. You can use it for a PCN. You can use it for council tax. You can use it for other stuff. Insurance firm. I've used it on insurance firms, sadly, I had to use it on the DVLA one time because they tried to fine me because I couldn't get my car into the garage because they were busy. I'm like, you what? You're fining me £3? What? Do you know what I mean? I was like, what? That's not what you're supposed to be there for. So I think the big message is everybody needs to start pushing back, and this is how we do it. If half the populace did this, we'd see change. If we don't take action in this way, we will just become slaves. That's what's going to happen. I mean, it'll get messy. There'll be riots and stuff, but this is what we need to do. Peaceful. I accept you've got a contract. We're going to attach our own conditions and we're going to send it back. So we agree to it. However, you need to adhere to these conditions. Because it's a two-stage process. There's two people involved, not one. And that's the scam. They're just pretending it's the government. And I'm not being funny. That sounds like a dictatorship to me. And that's kind of not what we're supposed to be in.
Exactly. And on that note, Bob Smith, which is not your real name, is there anything else before we go? Is there any last words that you want to say about this?
No, that's it.
Thank you, Bob Smith, which is not your real name, for your time, Bob Smith, which is not your name. And we'll continue our chat after this. Thank you, everybody, for watching that CMS guy. Remember, if you want this document, please send me an email at thatcmsguy@gmail.com, and I'll send it over to you post haste.